to kick off the session today, right, let's first start with understanding what is product market fit, right? And I think any launch, right, or any scale up of a product does not make a lot of sense if it hasn't met the product market fit. And before we go deep into it, first of all, let's understand what does product market fit mean, right? The first sort of misconception about product market fit is that it happens suddenly on a given day or at a given point in time, that you have a product market fit. But on the other hand, what actually happens is that you can only gauge through some signals that you are able to achieve a product market fit, right? So if you go by definition, it means that product market fit is basically being in a good market where you have demand, and you're able to make a product that satisfies that demand, right? People want to try it, people want to buy it. That's what basically product market fit means. Definition is easy, but knowing when you achieve product market fit, knowing that exactly the time is tough, because product market fit doesn't happen at a single point in time. And that's where I quote this quote from Ben Horowitz, that product market fit doesn't happen at one point in time. Uh, it 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 is a set of signals that you can only measure over a period of time to figure out that yes, there's a demand for your product and it's being used, right? So the framework that I generally use about understanding how to look for these signals, and we'll talk about these signals in few slides and then move to experimentation. But uh, the first thing that you should basically figure out is find your riskiest assumption, right? So if you're building a product, right, what is the riskiest assumption that you're testing? Let me take some examples, right? uh, Airbnb, right? When the product was just being built, the riskiest assumption that was being tested was that would people pay to stay in strangers' house, or would people want strangers to stay in their house, right? On both sides of the marketplace. That was the biggest assumption, right? The riskiest assumption, right? Let's talk about the riskiest assumption of Paytm, right? For example, when if you look at Paytm website about 10 to 11 years back, it was only a mobile top-up platform, right? The riskiest assumption was, would the people who go to the shops for topping up their mobile balance, would they go online and top up their mobile wallet, right? Let's take Dropbox. The riskiest assumption for Dropbox was, would people want to store their files online and sync it across devices instead of having it in pen drives and passing it around, right? So the first thing before you think about, when you launch your product, you have your MVP ready. The first thing you should figure out is that what is that one assumption, the riskiest one, which you have to validate. If you validate that assumption, then uh, you can move to next steps, right? So let's move to the next step. So let's say if your assumption fails, then you have to test another assumption and not the one that failed. And the second thing that's important is not only the growth trajectory. A lot of time the focus is on onboarding, acquisition, adoption, but these are all sort of the only the first part of the metric. To test your riskiest assumption, you should look at loyalty as well, and retention is one of the big factors. I think Aditya mentioned that you guys have already gone through retention and other growth metrics, so I'll not talk a lot about it, but I would say that retention is probably the most important metric to figure out whether whether you're able to test your assumption and users keep coming back to your app. So the two important questions to understand product market fit is that, are your users coming back, or are you acquiring new users and it's becoming cheaper over a period of time? Again, so I talked about some signals, right? Uh, so now, if you have your riskiest assumption and you build your MVP, to achieve product market fit, you can look for certain signals. And I'll go into six of these, but the most important thing to note is that you don't have to hit all six to achieve product market fit. A combination of two or three of these is also enough. Sometimes even one of the signals is enough that you've achieved product market fit. So the reason I'm sharing all of them is that it can be a mix and match. Some companies achieve in particular ways, some hit all six, some may hit the couple of them. Uh, The first and the most important metric I talked about is retention. uh, and retention is one of the key to understand whether customers find value in your product and they keep coming back, right? Now, if I have to take an example, you look on the graph on the right. This is from an article by Brian Balfour from, I think, Reforge, where he talks about. So let's talk about the product B, which is this green line. If the product doesn't have a product market fit, what will happen is that the percentage of active users will keep dropping over a period of time, and it will drop to 0% if you're not acquiring, right? If you keep acquiring, then the curve will be uh, slightly will have more curvature, but eventually it will go down, right? If you do not have a product market fit, because your active users are not coming back, so it will keep going down. A product that achieves product market fit, the you acquire users, the number of users keep dropping, but some users keep coming back on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, and then then your curve flattens, right? So it's a signal. It's one of the many signals, but it's the signal that if your curvature is getting flattened, that you have users coming back, and hence you may have a product market fit, right? Then how do you sustain product market fit, right? In order to continue to have product market fit, the best companies that survive and sustain product market fit are the ones that rely on experimentation and having as much as user feedback in the process as possible, right? So experimentation is one of the keys to have product market fit, and that's where let's talk a little bit more about experimentation, how to keep it iterative, how to make it a habit to achieve product market fit. Now, before we go to the experimentation basics, why should you experiment, right? Uh, Let me take you through some of the reasons why experimentation is important. The first one is that it happens in a lot of companies. We all know it, which is called the hippo culture, which is highest paid person's opinion culture, right? Somebody who is a senior stakeholder wants to build in a certain way. With experimentation, what happens is that you're able to sort of bring more objectivity into the process, and you allow experimentation to prove the value of the feature, and not somebody else or a senior stakeholder who wants to prove the value of a feature, right? It's a good way to deal with that kind of a culture in organization by getting more experimentation into your product. The second reason is that I think if the one takeaway from this session that I would definitely want everyone to have is that do not think of it as a solution. Not every feature is a solution, because you do not know if it will work or not. So think of every solution as a hypothesis, right? You have to test it. You have tested in the market. You have to figure out with users if it works or not. The third reason is if you never experiment and let's say you keep adding features, what will happen is that in your app or in your product, you will end up having some suboptimal features for a very long period of time without knowing if it works or not, right? Another reason is that again, experimentation is it proves things statistically, so you will get better at knowing what users want. And also it uh, the fourth reason is my favorite, that it also tells you that which features to remove, right? I mean, think about how many times do you think about removing features, right? I think within whole product management, there's this talk about adding more features that users love. But with experimentation, you can even figure out which features to remove, right? uh, and I think there's a comment also from Shri Harsha that eventually it is important to do user and market research before launching the product. Absolutely right. So see, you still have to do customer research, right? With experimentation, it's not that you have to stop doing that. But what happens is that with customer research, you will figure out not one pain point, you will figure out maybe five different pain points about your customers, right? More than one. How do you decide which pain point is more important, which feature will solve which pain point? Those are the things that you might not know about in the beginning. All you can say is that, okay, my assumption is that this is a good feature, this is a bad feature. Only the customers will prove whether if that feature actually solves their problem or not, and that's where the experimentation matters. uh, and the golden rule is that no metric moves in isolation, right? So when you grow your acquisition like crazy, what can happen is that your retention can get impacted, right? Or if you're just focusing on engagement, some other metric can go down, right? So when you're designing your experiments, we talked about experiment design, focus on which sort of metrics you want to drive.